Well, my name is Mary Kennedy. For those of you who don't know me, I founded Biotech Networks in 2008, and I have a background in biochemistry. I have my degrees in biochemistry. I moved into, oh, thank you everyone for saying that you can hear me. I moved into marketing pretty quickly after getting into industry, also into communications. You know, as you go along in your career, you'll find you really like something, and then you find something you really like a lot more. And about 3 years ago, I got a job at a company doing diversity and inclusion, and it was a big eye opener. I learned a lot. And so what we're doing now with Biotech Networks is we'll be giving workshops with certificates that you can earn, and we'll be doing that every other month throughout 2022. So please let me know if you have any topics. Unconscious bias is something that once I started learning about it, I couldn't believe how biased I was first, and also how it's an important topic. So I already put, if you go to the top, you can download this presentation at biotechnetworks.org/BNMAR22. So without further delay, got a lot to talk about. So this is just the schedule. So for about an hour, we'll be doing this workshop, and don't worry, it won't be boring. There'll be some hands-on parts. And also, I will do my best to address any questions as they come up in the comments. And so actually, speed networking and mentoring is open now because we wanted to make that very accessible. We've got people from all over the US and perhaps even all over the world on this call, and maybe late where they are. So we want to open up access to that. And the Hopin platform, I think it's become easier for all of us as we've all learned more about these platforms. So hopefully you can figure it out if you want to jump over there now. And then from 4 to 6 p.m., this session will be over, and we'll have the speed networking and mentoring still going on. And then I will also be at this Q&A chat. These are like Zooms. If you'd like to check out West Coast or East Coast networking, please do. And then also we've put a lot of guides over in the reception if you go over to the left, and you can get links, etc. Just to talk a little bit about Biotech Networks, founded in 2008, and we've moved all up and down the West Coast, and we're making our way down the East Coast. You may have seen last week that we launched DC, Maryland, Virginia Biotech Networks. And of course, this is a very important area. There's a lot going on because the capital is there, and of course, the NIH campus is there. So we're very excited. And we'll be doing a career fair April 12th, which I'll tell you more about as we go. All right, so to start the workshop, as they say, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. So we're going to talk about actually what unconscious or implicit bias is and why it's harmful. It's known by both of those names, unconscious or implicit. So we'll go through the definition and examples, and then also how am I biased? And you may be asking, how can I assume that you're biased? Well, we'll go through that. It's part of the how our brains are rigged, and while you may not be biased in one area, it's likely that you're biased in another area. So we'll talk about the types of bias. It's very eye-opening to think about the different ways that you can be biased towards people or in your thinking about decision-making as well. Then we'll talk about the importance in biotech. Most of us got into biotech because we want to make the world a better place. And I'll go through how implicit or unconscious bias can actually affect the products that go onto the market through biotech. So it's actually far-reaching. And then also steps to reduce you and your company's bias and the benefits. All right, so first I'd like to just make an analogy that at some point in your life you learned what a door was. You learned that it's a way to get through a wall, basically, and usually there's a handle. And so, you keep this stored away. You probably learned very, very early. And then throughout your life, you encountered many different types of doors. And so evolutionarily, it's a benefit if, as you're walking up to this funky Western door, you don't have to look at it and say, what in the world is this? You know, it may not look like, you know, a door that you've used before, but you make that shortcut. Otherwise, you'd be doing all sorts of processing all of the time. And so you have this shortcut for determining what a door is and how to use it. And so that's very useful evolutionarily. And so unfortunately, what happens is our brain is just wired to make these connections. And so we categorize people and situations as well. And this can be based on indirect or direct messaging. You could be listening to a podcast that you know, gives you a bias in a certain way. Or you can, for example, we'll talk about the things that we see every day that we just kind of catalog somewhere in our brain, and hence the term unconscious. And it's also the root cause of many inequalities. And that's why this is the first in our workshop series, because it provides a base for a lot of different ideas in diversity and inclusion. And so let's do a little thought experiment. So imagine that you're on a flight and you just landed, and as you're deplaning, you think, I really want to go tell the pilots that they made a great landing, especially in San Diego. If you've ever landed in San Diego, sometimes you're clutching the seat because we've got short runways in San Diego. So just imagine that you're about to walk into the cockpit and what you'll see. And would you be surprised if you saw this? I would be surprised. And this is because, and this is a great story. This is a mother and daughter team of captains and pilots. It's a really nice story. But we are programmed to think it's going to be two males or one male. And so, you know, this is, you know, we have the best intentions, but I'm pretty sure the last, probably the last 30 flights I've taken have had male pilots. And so this is an example that, you know, despite our best intentions, it's all around us, this bias. Oh, Sarita said that that they were on one of their flights. I don't want to assume your pronouns. All right, so that's just a thought experiment that I like to do. And then this week, it's very important to think about what's going on. We're having a Supreme Court justice going through confirmations. And, you know, of course, don't want to get into politics, but it was considered by some controversial that a Black woman was nominated. And why is that? Because white male Supreme Court justices are pretty much all that we know. That's our experience. And so, you know, it's just have to think about how that makes all of the steps that lead to Ketanji Brown Jackson, the judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. I'm sorry, she's got a long name. I'm trying to get better at saying it. Hopefully it will be rolling off all of our tongues when she gets confirmed. But, you know, every step that she's taken to get to this point has had this bias. And if you've watched any documentaries about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she faced the same. And so I'll just highlight in this next frame all of the Supreme Court justices that are either people of color or women and or women. And so this is only 7, or it's 6 out of, or 7, sorry. Now I have to count them again, 6. I guess I'm not good at presenting and counting at the same time. But 6 out of 115 have not fit that mold. And so, you know, it's something that keeps becoming perpetuated because, you know, that's the way it's always been. And of course, any company that you work at, you know that when they say that's the way things have always been, that's a red flag. So to talk about the effects of unconscious bias. And so these are a few studies that have been done. And I know many of you have science backgrounds, so I've been careful to include peer-reviewed references for most of the facts here. And so you can look at the references on the last side. So resumes with white-sounding names receive 50% more callbacks for interviews. Science faculty rated male applicants more competent and hireable than female applicants, and they got a higher starting salary. The mean salary of female researchers was $31,000 less than males, and then implicit bias among healthcare professionals can influence their behaviors and judgments. And this is really serious. This is when it starts to get to somebody's health. And I know maybe some of you think all of these are serious, and I agree, as I have experienced it as well. However, just, we really need to think about our careers and, what we mean to do in STEM careers and how it impacts the quality of life of everyone. So how are you biased? So there's a really great test called the Implicit Association Test, and it was actually developed by, I've got the book here, which I'll be talking about later. It's called Blind Spot, which is a summary of it, by Dr. Mazarin R. Banaji and Anthony G. Greenwald in 1995. And it's truly very fascinating, especially if you're a fan of science, that they actually went through trying to reinforce or prove that there are good associations between different types of, or non-biased association between different concepts. And it'll become more clear as we go through it. But they've developed 14 different tests to help you determine what your bias is. And two of them that I have taken are gender in science and race or skin color, but they have many, and I'll be sharing the link shortly. So what I'd like us all to do today, I'm sure you're all sitting at a computer. If you're on your phone, I'm pretty sure you can still take it if you're on your phone. But the question is, do you associate a gender more with liberal arts or science? And so what it will do is, once I give you the link, I'm not giving you the link yet because I know if you're like me, you're going to click on it right away, but I want to go through a few things. So it'll ask you for your demographics, and you may be irritated because, we're on this, you may feel timed, but remember, it's all for research. And they've come up with a lot of data and revised their model. So you'll be given a series of associations to make. And you want to be careful to read the instructions every time you make these associations. And then they'll do the work for you at the end and tell you whether or not you're biased. So you'll be timed, so work as quickly as you can with each. The part of the test is actually how long it takes you to make these associations. And so we'll break for 10 minutes for you to take the test. And so if you could comment in the chat when you're finished, and I will show the next slide. Once I put the link in, choose this Gender Science IAT, and I will put the link in the chat. Association for male with science and female for liberal arts. And then Quinn, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, said that their responses suggested little to no automatic association between female and male with science and liberal arts. And Sarita says the same. Again, apologies if I'm not getting your name correct. So sounds like you had almost neutral results just from what we've heard, and then Beatrice is saying the same. So what do the data say? Because remember, this study was published in 1995, so they've had quite a lot of time to get data. And so the data here are between 2003 and 2015. And in the top are the biased. So we start with a strong association, moderate, and slight. And the truth is that 70% are biased. And it looks like we're different than these results because our result here, most people should be in this bucket. If there was no bias, then everyone would have little to no automatic preference. But this is, a lot of data. And, the interesting part of this is that offhand, I don't know the demographics of who took this, but as a general rule, you can be a part of the group that has bias against it and still have bias. So remember what we were talking about, the Supreme Court justices and the pilots. The same goes for all of us who have seen, the upper management of many biotech companies is mostly male, et cetera. So you can have that same bias even though you're in that group. But it's good that several of you are in this group. I would say that probably someone who would come to a workshop is probably thinking about their biases already, but that's a good sign. And it also can be improved. One of the great things about implicit bias or unconscious bias is that is malleable. You can change throughout your life. And if you think about a growth mindset, and we'll talk about that. And then recent publications showed that if there are more women associated with a certain science, then the science community tends to think that science is more of a soft science than a hard science. So again, this is in the references at the end. But it holds up, although we hope that it improves. All right, just to talk about the different types of bias that you may not realize. And I think as scientists, we all need to think about this in our interactions with others as well as decision making. So affinity bias is bias towards anyone that looks like us, anyone that we can quote unquote relate to. Then there's all sorts of appearance bias. There's actually a beauty bias, people that are considered traditionally more in adherence with beauty standards tend to get a preference, or there may be a positive or a negative bias against them. Weight is another bias. I don't want to get into the biases that come with that, but certainly something to consider. Height as well. I know that there have been studies that have shown that people that are taller make more money every year. And then, of course, gender, which is, of course, well established, as well as race or ethnicity. And along with that goes names, and we talked about that with the resumes. And finally, age bias, which unfortunately I'm old enough to have experienced, but you just have to be positive and think about it. And there could also be reverse age bias, where you think someone is too young or is at the wrong age to understand, or different generations. There's a bias against different generations. So the first time I took a class on this, these all sounded reasonable to me, and I was, thought I knew about bias, but then the person that was giving the workshop talked about different types of bias that I didn't know, and I thought this was really interesting. Confirmation bias is the bias towards information that confirms a person's beliefs. And we're unfortunately seeing a lot of that these days with people looking at non-peer-reviewed sources on the internet. And I think scientists are very susceptible to this, because this is a big part of making decisions. We get status in the community based on our ability to make decisions. Conformity bias is peer pressure, and you may think that that might not be as relevant to a work situation, but I don't know if you've ever been to a meeting where you come out of the meeting and you can't believe what's been decided because you didn't agree with it, but you just kind of went along with it. But this is important, to voice your concerns and not fall prey to conformity bias. Attribution bias is assuming something based on your preconception. So, for example, if someone in your office is late to work every day and they're in a certain group that you associate with not being as hardworking, you may think that they're lazy, but the truth may be a lot more complex than that. It may be because there's bad public transportation. Of course, we know that that's the case in San Diego. And of course, most of you in other areas have better public transportation. And then authority bias, which is the manager or the leader is right. And so this is, something that's a bit tricky, because someone with more experience is often right, but you really need to consider, again, do you really want to do things the way they've always been done? So these were very eye-opening to me, and if you, it was very fascinating to do more research into it. And if you're interested, start with the references that I give you, and it's fascinating. So unconscious bias at work, which is not so fun. So recruiting and hiring. So affinity bias can come to play, appearance, age, and then promotions. So some companies may have reviews that are subjective. For example, someone might have met all their goals, but they're considered to be aggressive in meetings or assertive in meetings. And how do you, how as an employee, how do you decide how to act when you have a review, but then you can be given the subjective I can't think of the right word, when you're given a subjective part of your review. So anyway, it's best to keep them more subjective, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then also open positions given to cronies. So I think a lot of us have seen that happen, that we didn't even know that there was a job opening, but it was given to someone behind closed doors. And of course, this is a big issue, because there's all sorts of bias, affinity bias, etc., that can take place. And then in meetings, if you watch social media at all, you see a lot of memes about people being interrupted or their ideas co-opted. So somebody says something, nobody really listens. Someone else says it, the same thing, and takes credit for it. So unfortunately, there's a lot of that. And I think in life science organizations, a lot of us, including myself, are introverts. So it's something that you really need to make sure that all voices are heard in meetings. And then events. So we have as an example, I know of an organization that's very close to the Torrey Pines golf course, and they like to have a group go out every day. And while maybe not every day, but while golf can be a sport for anyone, it tended to cause some people to feel excluded. And then maybe events after work. If you decide to have events after work exclusively, you're potentially excluding people who have childcare or child pickup duties. So just different things to think about. So I'd like to talk about a recruiting scenario where bias comes into play. So for candidate A, you review their resume and you realize they went to your alma mater. And so when you have your 30-minute interview with them, you spend 10 minutes reminiscing with them about your shared college. And at the end of the interview, you realize you weren't able to ask a few important questions. But, that person went to your alma mater, you feel positively, you think that they would probably answer those questions favorably, so you give them a good review. So for candidate B, you aren't familiar at all with their college. So, you have a positive attitude, but once you get into the interview, you don't really have a good icebreaker. And so you jump right into the questions. And the candidate is nervous. There was no icebreaker. There may be other things that are making them feel nervous. And you do ask all your questions, and you find yourself going into a lot of detail with each of them because you just, there was no icebreaker. You don't really know much about them. And, we all know how it's easy to get on to tangents. So when you think about the answers to the questions, you might not, they might not have answered them the way that you thought they would answer them. And so as a result, you rate candidate B lower than candidate A. And, the truth is that you didn't ask candidate A those questions that you're judging candidate B on, and you're just assuming that they'd have positive answers. So this is, kind of an extreme example, and I'm using the example of, the college because that's kind of neutral. But I hope you can see that you really need to standardize interviews so that candidate A and candidate B get the same opportunity. And I've also been in situations where a candidate is interviewing, and even that day, somebody sends an email out to the whole group that's interviewing them and says, this is what I think of this candidate. And so they're biasing people. They're giving people conformity bias potential. So it's just something you really need to think about. And so what is the result of these types of biases? And so the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, they've just changed their name. They used to be the Biotechnology Industry Organization. They did a report in 2021 about diversity and inclusion. So they found that women are 47% of the biotech workforce, but only 31% of executives. So even just a little bit of a bias along a woman's career, they don't have the advantage when they get the job. And this can be for any historically excluded group. They don't get the advantage when they get hired. They don't get promoted. Somebody gets a job behind a closed door, and it just adds up to the point where you really see it in the executives. And then for Black professionals, they're 7% of the workforce in biotech, and this is much less than their population in the general population, and only 3% of executives. And then Latinx are 4% of workforce and executives. So the good news is 70% of companies in biotech say diversity and inclusion is a goal for their organization. The bad news is that only 24% of companies have career development programs for women, and 18% have programs for people of color. And so this is the really important thing that companies need to do is, improve their recruiting as well as their career development to make sure that historically excluded groups will make it to the higher levels. And then the bad news also is only 39% of biotech companies have diversity and inclusion goals for leaders. And so why is this important? And I'd like to give an example that's a little bit silly, a little bit irrelevant, but hopefully it will stick with you. So there's a German company run by two men, and sorry if I'm picking on men, but this is an example that I think really hits it home. So these entrepreneurs decided that they were going to come up with a glove that can be used for females' menstruation cycles. And so this glove can be used to dispose of tampons or pads. And most of the women probably on this call are thinking that's completely ridiculous. And it just points out in a kind of I hate to make fun of these two entrepreneurs, but they were quickly shut down, and actually, they actually made women's periods seem somewhat shameful. So this is what happens when you have people who are creating products and they really don't understand the market. So this isn't in healthcare, but I didn't, there's a lot of things that are happening in healthcare that actually kind of hit a little bit too close to home. If you watch, the evening news, you get lots of ads for erectile dysfunction, but not as many for female libido. But I digress. So yes, this is a real story. It's called Pinky Gloves or something. It's a German company. But yeah, it seems like it's a farce. But yeah, I can send you the link if you're interested, Malika. All right. So the effects of lack of STEM diversity. So because we're making the world a better place through medicines, devices, and diagnostics, if we don't have that representation in the highest levels of biotechs, then products just don't get chosen for anyone other than the demographic that is present. And I'm generalizing, but there's a lot of data that may not directly point to this, but needs to be studied in more detail because there are a lot of inequalities. So there's a Danish study that shows women are diagnosed 4 years later than men for a wide variety of indications. And then in 2020, very sadly, COVID-19 death rates were 2 to 3 times higher in Black, Native, and Latino individuals compared to white and Asian populations. So again, there's a lot of things that go into play, but I think it's our imperative to figure out what's going on with this and to also help to alleviate it by improving diversity and inclusion. And then also, one thing I actually didn't realize until I did research for this is that women experience adverse drug reactions twice as often as men, and the evidence points to incorrect dosages. And the root cause of this is that not as many women participate in clinical trials. And I don't know the whole story behind this, but I was really shocked. Even to the point of, using male animals rather than female animals. So, all important things that we need to consider. Of course, we can't solve every problem, and there's also societal issues, but I think we really need to do better. So getting to the practical part, reducing bias at your organization. So just in general, there's many things that you can do. One is employee resource groups. And so we had an event on this a couple of months ago. And so historically excluded groups may have an employee resource group at a company that helps them to talk about their challenges and to also, share stories, etc. And so I didn't put the link here, but it's on our YouTube channel. It's pretty easy to find. Also getting feedback through employee surveys is important. So what are the issues, who feels excluded where, and what can be improved. And also championing diverse leaders. So one of the books that I'm going to be suggesting is a book called What Works by Iris Bonet. And I used to have, I don't know if I have it so I can show it to you. Looks like I don't have it in my tiny little bookshelf back here. But one of the things that they found is that even putting up pictures, and this is back in the day when people went into the office, putting up pictures of the diverse leadership helps people to think about their career development and being able to reach those higher levels. And so you can do this, through pictures in your lobby. You can do this through social media, etc. But, if you can't see it, you can't be it, similar to what we were talking about with the Supreme Court nominations. And then promotions are a very important part of, getting historically excluded people into higher levels. So you want to track reviews and career advancement metrics. So there are certain groups that aren't advancing. And, if you don't track it, you can't improve it. And then also your annual reviews, you need to structure them and reduce subjectivity. So anything that could be someone's opinion of how someone is working is at risk for adding unconscious bias to the process. And then also communicate all open jobs internally. So we talked about those jobs that get given to someone behind closed doors, and there's a lot of issues with that. And then also meetings, provide inclusive meeting guidelines and schedule templates to help people to be able to voice their opinions. And I talked about the meeting where you leave and you don't know why they decided something. Then also rotating, organizing, and note taking, because I've heard one rule that anyone could take notes except for the youngest person in the room, because they're automatically put at a disadvantage because they're always note-taking and not experience being able to give feedback in the meeting. And then also reducing bias. Recruiting is a big area. And again, number one, track metrics and set goals. And Iris Bonet also talks about structured interviews. So we talked about candidate A and candidate B. The candidate that didn't go to college with me didn't get a fair shake because, the other person, I assumed a lot because they look like me. So ask all candidates the same questions, assign a number ranking for each, and then pool them. And have a sum for each candidate. So anonymize or blind candidate data or hiring processes. So I know in the age of LinkedIn, this is really difficult, but any way that you can do that, please strive to do that. We talked about emails going around saying, this person has a thumbs up or thumbs down. You want to prevent that. Then also, Candace Norty was in one of our diversity and inclusion panels, and she works with a recruiting company called Sloan, and she had the great idea that you should provide all candidates with a virtual background. And so, some people, especially college students, might, have a background that they might be embarrassed of. They might be living in a multifamily, situation, but this is a way that you can level the playing field. You also want to question cultural fit assessments. So, we've all heard of someone saying that a candidate isn't a cultural fit. What does that mean? Does that mean they don't look like the other people at the company? And, you really need to think those through. And it's also, sort of a red flag that I've seen. And then also participate in diversity-focused recruiting events. And if you follow Biotech Networks or me on LinkedIn, you see that we're always promoting them. And we actually are having a diversity-focused recruiting event April 12th. But I'm almost running out of time, so I want to... So the benefits of bias reduction and improved diversity and inclusion. There's all sorts of information on the internet. There's just a lot of data, and it's complex data, but it's an overwhelming yes that improving diversity and inclusion improves the bottom line in addition to the moral imperative. So I won't go through these since we're kind of running out of time, but you can download that presentation and take a look at these. And then reducing your own biases. So I would suggest we did the science and gender assessment today. I would strongly suggest that you try a few others. I just redid the race, and I failed. And I really try to follow a lot of diverse voices, and I still have that unconscious bias, which I'm going to continue to work on. So realize that when you are making assumptions, and question your thinking, and then seek out science and media from diverse sources. So I have a Twitter list that is all accounts that are diversity in STEM. So you can click that and visit that and follow that. And then also travel, watch foreign films, watch diverse comedians. One of the things that angers me is when I look on Netflix and they're offering me 10 white male comedians, so I have to kind of keep scrolling. But if you keep looking, you can find that, and it also helps them to get more exposure. And then listen to and understand diverse voices. Be as inclusive as possible with your decisions, even social outings. We were talking about just consider other schedules and other interests, and be an ally. And then also amplify voices. We talked about the employee resource group, and maybe if you see a need for that in your company, you can get it started, even if you're not part of the historically excluded group. And finally, volunteering. A lot of these biases start very young, and you can work with kids, you can work with a lot of different organizations. All right, one thing this is really an important point. I'm of the age where affirmative action was introduced, and it was considered to be controversial. But this image really pointed out that a lot of people talk about equality, which is giving equal resources to all. But what we really need is equity. We want everyone to have exactly what they need in order to succeed. And you can see that these two people that are shorter, they're given so that they can all see the sports field, baseball. All right, so resources. As I talked about, this book, Blind Spot, is a great book. What Works in Gender Equality. And this is also an incredibly interesting book because it talks about behavioral design. So we talked about structuring your interviews and structuring your promotions. And this is what Iris Bonet talks about, that if you can provide structure to people, it's easy for them to leave their biases out, or even maybe improve their biases by following structured interviews, etc. Then Netflix has a movie. It's very eye-opening. It's definitely not the feel-good movie of the year, but if you want to understand the pervasive bias that exists in academic science, watch this. And the implicit association test, again, I encourage you to take all of those tests. Ohio State has the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, and they have training, as well as UCSF has diversity and inclusion resources, which include training. So again, you can link to these all in the presentation. And then almost finally, you can take a test and get one of these lovely certificates. I'll put the link in the chat. So of course, I think it's an easy test. You can see what you missed and take it over. And what we plan to do is to have, again, bi-monthly workshops. We could also come to your organization and give you a customized workshop as well. And then bi-monthly diversity and inclusion workshop series. To be honest, I had planned to put a whole list here, but I ran out of time. But it's not always going to be me. We're going to be bringing in speakers to talk about things like mindfulness and some of these other aspects that we talked about to improve your diversity and inclusion at your organization. And then our YouTube channel has a lot of information. We'll be putting this video up. And then we also have a diversity and inclusion playlist. As I pointed out, we had a really great event about employee resource groups that's there. And then also career development. As I pointed out in this presentation, a lot of the things that you can do is to help historically excluded professionals develop their career. And then again, our career fair is April 12th, and you can click here, but I have one more slide. All right, so we are wrapping up this D&I workshop, Unconscious Bias, very shortly. This is already open, the speed networking and mentoring. And then also I will be sitting at this Q&A and chat, but if you're interested in talking to people from the West Coast or from the East Coast, we have these 2 sessions, which you'll be able to see on the left. And let me just click over to see if it's live. The sessions are not quite live, but they will be at the top of the hour, which is in 2 minutes. And then just to talk a little bit about speed networking and mentoring. And so the reason we did this is, if you were at the very, very beginning of this event, I said that it's hard to do virtual events right now because people are kind of all over the place on what they want. And so this was a way to really add more value to the speed networking, because we really think it's the Hop-In platform is very unique in being able to allow you to do speed networking online. It's the only platform that we found. So if you sign up to be a mentor, so there are 2 different tickets, and we had probably about 10 people sign up to be mentors. Add mentor to your name. And that way people will be able to tell. If you don't have time to do that, just tell them that you're a mentor, and you'll have 7 minutes to chat during each of these events. And so you can shorten the time by just saying, hey, looks like we're done talking. Let's move on. Or you can extend the time at the top. And then also, if you go to, these are the references. If you go to the reception area, we have a list of questions which we also emailed to you to help you break the ice. As we talked about in the interview, if someone's nervous, breaking the ice really helps a lot. So that's all I have, and I will be, it looks like we have 1 minute left. I will be at the Q&A table if you'd like to say hi, participate in the speed networking. It's a really, really great opportunity. Take the test so you can get a certificate. I'd love to see how, this is our first time doing it. I'd love to see how it works out. All right. I don't know. I forget whether it's going to cut me off, but I'm open to talking to you at the Q&A table, or feel free to comment any questions that you have. All right. Thank you.